Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Marona Zamora wash processed Ecuador from Mood Trap Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Mood Trap, based out of Singapore, and this is their second ever appearance on this channel, having previously reviewed the Shea 22 056, a wash processed Ethiopian coffee. And if you watched that review, then you heard us reference a separate coffee from Mood Trap that prompted our purchase from them. And that is, of course, this coffee right here, as this is yet another Mejorado coffee. And it's no secret that the Mejorado variety has been my favorite over the course of the last year. So when I found out that they were releasing this coffee, it's one that immediately caught my interest and prompted us to purchase from them. Definitely looking forward to discussing this one, as this right here is day 51. And recipe we went with for this coffee was the same as the previous Mood Trap coffee, which was a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And this one I liked a little more through the Chemex, which indicates a more medium grind. Roast profile for this coffee, as we also mentioned in the previous Mood Trap review, it is a very light coffee. It is very much on par with some of the lightest roasting coffee roasters that we have ever reviewed on this channel. I will say that this one too was maybe not quite as light and what I would say slightly underdeveloped as some of the coffees we've had from Apollon's Gold. But even then, it's just as close, it's nearly as close, a very light coffee by most standards and metrics. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 28, first impression, and opted for the V60, and first thing I noticed was that this coffee was pretty light, but the most interesting aspect of it was that it did have the Mejorado-like aura to it with a slightly candied aspect, hidden sweetness skewing a little bit more in terms of a tart direction overall though. For the most part, I felt like there was tons of potential within this coffee, and I was very curious to see what was going to come from this day going forward. And if you didn't catch the disclaimer in the previous video, I actually did not see that these coffees are a 40-day suggested rest period. So we also started this one early, which again will give huge credit to Mood Trap at the end. We will continue on for the time being to day 31 as we ran it through the Chemex, and this was an absolutely stunning cup of coffee as there was immense sweetness. This one was very much in line with the expected brown candied sweetness of previous Mejorado coffees. The listed apple felt apt as there was a slight brightness to the cup while there was a moderate stone fruit quality. The cup did skew heavily in the direction of that candied sweetness though. For the most part, an absolutely excellent day, one of the more impressive days we've had of a coffee, at least this early into drinking it. Day 34 opted for the April brewer, and the cup was very sweet. That's the first takeaway I had, but that's no surprise given that this coffee has been very sweet already up to this point. A bit more of that brown candy Mejorado sweetness with a complementary brightness, in line again with the listed apple acidity. Candied sweet yet again, just very sweet in general. That's going to be a theme to this one. Day 37, back through the V60 with increased temperatures, and it initially starts out slightly tame without a particular focus, but it does cool down exceptionally well as the sweetness skyrockets. The Mejorado brown candy sweetness is extremely high as there's a lingering complexity and a softer stone fruit direction underneath this very strong candied sweetness. Best day so far, another really impressive day to this coffee. Day 40, back through the Chemex, and a similar experience to the V60 as the cup starts out slightly sweet and moderate before absolutely skyrocketing in sweetness. There's a slightly complex aspect in terms of the sweetness that ranged from a caramel chocolate bar to an almost waffle-like maple sweetness and sugar. Fruit brightness is yet again at the forefront with a slight herbal florality as well. So many things to pick up within this coffee, but even then, what I'm noticing and what is standing out the most is the very strong sweetness that is experienced from this one. Day 43, back through the V60, and the cup continues to remain unbelievably sweet. One of the sweetest coffees that we've ever featured on this channel. Heaps of the brown candy Mejorado sweetness yet again. The cup is still complex with a fair bit of brightness and fruits, but again, it continues to be marked by the sweetness. The sweetness is absolutely immense. Day 45. One last try through the Chemex, and this is the one I decided that I had a very slight preference towards the Chemex as it just seemed to offer a slight bit more sweetness and clarity and a little bit more of the fruit brightness at the forefront before cooling down into a wildly sweet cup. And on day 47, I actually ran out of space for notes, but the more of the same, as the biggest takeaway I have is the wild sweetness. A bit more of a milk chocolate-like aspect. The green apple, I think that's one of the notes that they have listed on here. Present yet again, but obviously that took a back seat to one of the other things we were experiencing from this coffee. So let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. And 2 level 5s, and I don't think those level 5s will come as a surprise to anybody. It is the sweetness and then the caramel. So let's go ahead and start with the sweetness. Level 5, yes, that's something I've said from the start of this review. This coffee right here is one of the sweetest coffees that we have ever reviewed on this channel, and I would say that it is on par with the very best that we experienced from the Pepe Hijón from Manhattan last year, which, as a lot of people know, was my favorite coffee from the entirety of 2022. So that's saying something, because that coffee stood out for its immense sweetness. This one is right there. I honestly would have to try these coffees side by side at their very best to see which one may be a little bit more sweet. The sweetness present within this one was just absolutely wild. Again, I would probably score this at a level 6 on a tasting wheel if it went that high. This is such a sweet coffee. Caramel, level 5, yes, and that's that brown candy sweetness. Yet again, one of the most abundant and strong flavor profiles I've experienced, even for a Mejorado coffee. This one would be on the higher side of level 5, could also justify a level 6. Those two things were really dominant and strong within this one, and 2 things I very much enjoyed within this coffee. There are some other things we should probably discuss. We'll start with the cleanliness, level 4. That's the same as the Pepe Hijón from Manhattan. It also scored that level 4 mark. Usually we reserve those level 5s for extremely clean coffees. This one, while it was very clean, while it had a very well-defined flavor profile, it isn't to the same extent as Gesha coffees in general. So higher side of level 4, still wonderful in that sense. Finish, level 4. For all that really strong brown candied sweetness, it didn't have the same sort of lasting effect as the Ethiopian Gesha Village coffee we had reviewed for Mood Trap. So it's still there, maybe not to the same extent, but a fair bit of a finish that tapers off maybe slightly quicker than some of the other coffees. Acidity, level 4. Yes, and that's the apple note that I do have listed on here. Again, surprisingly, there was a slight bit more brightness than maybe I might have expected, given that I tried the Ethiopian Gesha Village first, and I think I was just kind of surprised in general by Mood Trap, because I expected them to maybe be some overly acidic, super light coffees, but while they were super light, they didn't necessarily have that overly acidic, just dominating factor to them. So I'm very happy with it being there at that level 4. I'm very happy with both those coffees actually scoring there at that mark. Citrus fruit, level 4. Yes, and that's typically where I associate the apple to the most, so that's why it's as high as it is. That apple-like brightness that was present within this one did give a nice contrasting component to the very strong brown candied sweetness. Stone fruit, level 3. Yes, we're going through the level 3s now real quick. I do believe that they had some stone fruit note listed on here, and I could see that it was one of those things where after you're getting underneath that very strong sweet component, you are able to experience more of the fruits. And that was one of the things experienced, as well as the florality. Another thing that I had mentioned kind of early on. And when I'm kind of looking back on this, I go, yeah, they were present, but again, this coffee really seemed to be dominated by one very strong and defining factor to it. Chocolate, level 3. Yes, that's yet another one that did seem to have a fair bit of that in somewhat significant abundance, but even then it was kind of dominated by some of the other attributes within this one. Last thing really worth discussing is the body at the level 2. Yes, this coffee was brewed with the Chemex, so of course that's going to insinuate a lighter body. Even then, some of these Mejorado coffees may not necessarily have the most body in general, and that part's fine with me. This one, slightly higher side of level 2, a little bit more lighter bodied than I might have expected going into it. As I'm kind of looking back on this tasting wheel, it's obviously dominated by 2 very strong things, as this coffee was, but it's a tasting wheel that I think is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I will say this because I am absolutely certain of this as of this moment. This is my favorite coffee of the entire year, and I'm not taking that lightly, as we've had a couple of really good coffees. I'm thinking of the Firestone from Apollon's Gold, as well as the SL34 Librita from Leuchtfeuer. This coffee right here is better than both of those for me. I enjoyed this one more than both of those, and this one is on par with the Pepe Hijón, which is really saying something, because that's one of my favorite coffees I've ever reviewed on this channel. This coffee is one of my favorite coffees I've ever reviewed on this channel. This one exceeded my expectations by a lot. And obviously the thing that exceeded my expectations about this one was the sweetness. If you're going to offer me this extremely unique sweet component to it that I've only ever experienced from one other coffee, then of course I'm going to be just absolutely impressed by this coffee. And right from the get-go, just like with the other coffee we reviewed from Mood Trap, I couldn't mess this one up. I started early when I shouldn't have, and it turned out better than expected. No matter what sort of adjustments I made, it turned out better than expected. I was really just kind of going through the notes of what experiences I was getting from this coffee. It's complex. It offers great depth, but more than that, it offers two things that I was very much looking for specifically in this one. Not only did it have those, but it exceeded that expectation for this one. So I'm just marveling at this one right here. It's just far exceeded expectations. And I know I've said that a couple of times, but I just really want to hammer home how much I liked this coffee, because this is one of those coffees I'm going to look back for the entirety of the time that we have this channel and say this one right here was one of the real big standouts for me. This is a favorite to win my favorite coffee of the entire year. So massive credit to Mood Trap on this one. I do think that this was an extremely impressive coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to is somebody that is looking for that Mejorado brown candy sweetness. And one more thing I do want to point towards on this one, it's not as tricky as the Pepe Hijón from Manhattan. That coffee was a very tricky coffee, and if you watched our review of that coffee, then it just took me a while to get that one right. When I got it right, it was, I mean, I don't know which of these two coffees I enjoyed more. Again, I would have to try them side by side, but when I got that coffee right, it was immense. This coffee didn't take a whole lot of work. Right from the first time trying it, I said, this has amazing potential. The second time I tried it, I said, I've reached that potential. This coffee just has so many great things about it, and continued to have so many great things about it from start to finish. So that's pretty much all I can say on this one, and I'm going to leave it at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Marona Zamora, wash processed Ecuador from Mood Trap Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.